The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath for something beautiful to happen. The moon hung heavy and silver above the lake, its reflection trembling softly on the surface of the water. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine and rain, wrapping the world in a fragile calm that felt too perfect to be real. She sat there, on the edge of the wooden pier, her legs dangling above the cool ripples, lost in the soft hum of the midnight breeze. Her name was Alara, and in the stillness of that night, her thoughts were louder than the world around her. She had come here seeking silence, but found instead the echo of a memory she couldn't let go of, a memory shaped like a man, like a smile she once knew, like words that still lived somewhere deep in her chest. And when she heard the slow, familiar footsteps approaching from behind, her heart knew before her eyes did it was Daniel. The sound of his steps had a rhythm she could never forget. It was the melody of 1,000 nights she had spent waiting, hoping, and dreaming. He stopped just a few steps behind her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Only the night spoke for them, the quiet splash of water against the pier, the soft whisper of wind through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl who seemed to understand the wait between them. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was low, hesitant, but warm like a candle flickering in a cold room. "I thought you wouldn't come back here," he said. Alara didn't turn immediately. She stared at the moon's reflection, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the wood beneath her. "I didn't plan to," she whispered. "But some places don't let you go that easily." Her voice trembled slightly, the way a voice does when it's carrying too much truth. Daniel stepped closer, the wooden planks creaking softly under his weight. "Neither do some people," he said gently. Alara closed her eyes, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. She could feel the ghost of every memory they had ever shared, the laughter under the summer rain, the endless nights of whispered dreams, the promises they once believed would never break. But promises are fragile things, and theirs had shattered quietly, like glass in the dark. "You left without saying goodbye," she said, her tone quiet but sharp. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know how to," he admitted. "Everything I wanted to say felt too small compared to what I felt." Alara finally turned to look at him, and in that instant, the world seemed to hold still. His face was a mixture of guilt and longing, shadows and moonlight dancing across the angles of his jaw. His eyes, those same deep, kind eyes she once trusted more than anything, searched hers as if trying to find the version of himself she used to love. "You could have tried," she said softly. Her words weren't angry anymore, just tired, heavy with the ache of what could have been. Daniel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath mix with the cool night air. "I thought leaving was the right thing," he murmured. "You had your dreams, and I didn't want to hold you back." Alara let out a small, bitter laugh, not out of cruelty, but pain. "You didn't hold me back," she said. "You were the only thing that kept me grounded." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and Daniel's expression softened. Without thinking, he sat beside her, their shoulders barely touching, both of them staring at the same trembling reflection on the lake. For a while, they didn't speak. Words had always come easily before, playful, warm, alive, but now they felt heavy, sacred, like each one had to be chosen carefully so it wouldn't break the fragile peace between them. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Do you ever think about that night? The one when it rained so hard we couldn't see the road?" Alara smiled faintly, the memory slipping back like a dream. "You mean the night we almost got lost?" she said. "We weren't lost," he replied softly. "We just didn't know where home was yet." She turned to look at him again, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "And did you ever find it?" she asked.
Not until now.
Daniel hesitated before answering. "Not until now," he said, his gaze steady on her. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with everything they had never said. The night wrapped around them like a secret. The stars blinking softly as if eavesdropping on two souls trying to remember how to speak the same language again. Alara looked away, tears forming but refusing to fall. "We can't go back," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But maybe we don't have to." Alara looked away, tears forming but refusing to fall. "We can't go back," she whispered.
Maybe we don't
"I
have
know,"
to.
he said. "But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we just start from here." The words hung between them, fragile but alive, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of the past. Only the warmth of the present, and the quiet, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, love could find its way back after midnight. And as the moonlight kissed the surface of the lake, their hands found each other not out of habit, but out of something deeper, something that still lived beneath the scars and silence. The world kept turning, the night kept breathing, and in that soft, trembling space between heartbeats, their midnight love talk began again. For a long while after their hands met, neither of them moved. The touch was gentle, uncertain, but it carried the gravity of 1,000 memories. All the nights they had spent side by side, all the moments they had almost spoken but didn't, all the love that still lingered between them like a half-forgotten song. Ilara's fingers trembled slightly, and Daniel felt it, that small, involuntary tremor that spoke louder than any words could. "You're still the same," he said quietly, his voice a whisper that barely reached the night air. Ilara smiled faintly, a fragile smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And you're still late," she replied softly. He laughed, and the sound was both familiar and foreign, a sound she hadn't realized she had missed so much until she heard it again. The laughter faded into silence, and then came something deeper, that strange, tender quiet that exists only between two people who have loved and lost each other but never stopped belonging to one another. The moonlight bathed them in its pale glow, turning every tear, every breath, every heartbeat into something sacred. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the dark met the lighter edge of dawn. "Do you ever wonder," he said slowly, "what would have happened if I'd stayed?" Ilara didn't answer right away. Her gaze was on the water, watching the ripples fade into stillness again. "All the time," she admitted finally. "But wondering doesn't change the ending." Her voice broke slightly, the words carrying both strength and sorrow. Daniel turned to look at her, his jaw tightening. "Maybe not," he said, "but it doesn't erase the story either." There was a pause, the kind of pause that seems to stretch across time. He wanted to reach for her again, to tell her that leaving her had been the hardest thing he'd ever done, that he had carried her voice in his head every night since. But the words sat heavy in his throat, like stones too sharp to swallow. Ilara finally looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't anger, it was ache. A deep, tender ache that came from loving someone who had become a memory but never a stranger. "You said you left because you didn't want to hold me back," she said, her tone trembling between disbelief and pain. "But don't you see, Daniel? You were never holding me back. You were the reason I believed I could fly." He swallowed hard, his eyes lowering. "And I was afraid," he said honestly. "Afraid I'd become the reason you stopped." The confession hung between them, raw and unpolished. Ilara's eyes softened. "You don't get to decide what's right for someone else," she whispered. "Love doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks to be there." The lake shimmered with the reflection of the stars above, each ripple catching a glint of light like 1,000 whispered secrets. Daniel's voice broke the silence again, quieter this time. "Do you hate me for leaving?" he asked. Ilara shook her head slowly. "No," she said. Daniel. "I hate that you didn't fight for us. I hate that I waited, thinking maybe one day you'd come back, and when you finally did, I had already taught myself how to stop dreaming." The tears she had been holding back finally slipped down her cheeks, tracing silver lines in the moonlight. Daniel reached up, his thumb brushing away one tear, and when his skin met hers, the world seemed to still once more. "I should have come back sooner," he murmured, voice trembling. "Every night I thought about you, but every time I convinced myself that maybe you were better off without me." Ilara's laughter was soft and broken, a sound that cracked at the edges. "Better off," she repeated. "Daniel, you were the only thing that ever made me feel alive. I tried to forget, I really did, but love isn't something you erase. It's something you carry, whether you want to or not." Her words hit him like rain, cleansing, stinging, real. He felt a tear slip from his own eye, unexpected but honest. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "After everything, why did you come back?" Ilara looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching his face as though she could read every unspoken sentence he'd never said. "Because," she whispered, "I never stopped waiting for this conversation. I needed to hear you say that you still care. That I wasn't just something you left behind." Daniel took
I
a
have
deep breath,
always
his voice
regretted my
trembling when he spoke again.
mistakes.
You were never something I left behind. You were everything I left behind. His words hit the air like lightning, bright and unfiltered. And if I could change it, I would. I'd choose you every single time, even if the world told me not to. Ilara's tears fell freely now, but her lips curved into a small, broken smile. Then say it, she whispered. Say it like you mean it. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't hide. I love you, Ilara, he said. I never stopped. Not for a day, not for a breath, not even when I told myself I had to let go. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Ilara's breath hitched, her heart trembling beneath the force of them. You can't just say it and expect everything to be the same, she said quietly. I'm not the same girl you left. Daniel nodded, his expression solemn. I know, he said softly. But I'm not the same man who walked away, either. For a moment, neither spoke. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, fragile, trembling, alive. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began to sing, its song weaving through the silence like a promise reborn. And under that silver moonlight, with hearts scarred but still beating for each other, they sat two souls on the edge of everything they had lost, daring to believe in what might still be found. Their midnight love talk wasn't just about the past anymore, it was about forgiveness, about second chances, and about the courage to begin again when the world thought it was over. The world around them had gone completely still. The lake no longer rippled, the trees no longer whispered, even the air seemed to pause as if the night itself wanted to listen. Ilara sat motionless, her gaze lost somewhere between Daniel's eyes and the horizon where the first faint touch of dawn was beginning to bloom. The darkness that had once felt comforting now felt fragile, temporary. Everything was changing, the sky, the light, their hearts. So what happens now? She asked quietly, her voice soft but trembling with the kind of fear that comes from hope. Daniel didn't answer at first. His chest rose and fell with a slow, uneven rhythm, as if every breath was a battle. I don't know, he said finally. But I don't want this to end here, not again. Ilara looked away, her fingers tracing small circles on the wood between them. It's not that simple, Daniel, she murmured. We can't just pick up where we left off. He turned to her, his voice aching with quiet desperation. Then tell me where to start, he said. Because I'll start anywhere, I'll do anything, just don't ask me to walk away again. His words hung in the cold air, raw and unguarded. Ilara closed her eyes, and for a moment she could see it, the life they could have had, the laughter, the quiet mornings, the dreams that might have grown between them like wildflowers. But dreams are dangerous things when they meet reality. You think love is enough? She asked softly. You think we can erase everything that happened with a few words and a promise? Daniel shook his head. No, he said. But I think love is the reason to try. The simplicity of his answer made her chest ache. She wanted to believe him, God, she wanted to, but belief is hard when your heart has learned to protect itself. She turned toward him again, her eyes shimmering. When you left, she began, I didn't sleep for weeks. I kept thinking maybe you'd come back, maybe I'd hear your voice again. But you didn't. And every day that passed, I taught myself a little more how to stop needing you. Her words sliced through the quiet like glass. And did it work? He asked softly. She laughed, a sound half broken, half bitter. If it did, she said, do you think I'd still be here? The honesty in her voice tore something open in him. He reached for her hand again, but this time she didn't pull away. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as if afraid she might disappear if he held too tightly. Ilara, he whispered, I can't change the past. But I can promise you this, I won't leave again. Not unless you ask me to. She stared at their joined hands, then up at his face. And what if I can't trust you anymore? She asked. Then I'll stay until you can, he said simply. There was no pleading in his tone, no false charm, only truth. It was that honesty, quiet and unpolished, that broke her last wall. Tears gathered in her eyes, and this time she didn't stop them. They rolled freely down her cheeks, catching the moonlight like tiny crystals. You hurt me, she whispered. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Daniel's voice cracked as he replied, You were more than enough. I just wasn't ready to believe I deserved you. The confession was small, but it hit with the weight of years. Ilara let out a slow, shaky breath. You think saying that changes what you did? She asked. No, he said. But it's the truth. And maybe that's a start. The night around them began to thin, the edges of dawn bleeding softly into the horizon. A soft golden light touched the lake, turning the water into liquid fire. Ilara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. You know what scares me the most? She asked. Daniel shook his head silently. It's that I still love you, she whispered. After everything. After all the nights I spent trying not to. Daniel's breath hitched, and he looked at her like she was the only thing left in the world that mattered. Then don't be scared of it, he said gently. Love doesn't mean we forget the pain. It means we decide it's worth feeling again. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her tears had stopped, but her eyes were full of emotion, longing, confusion, and something close to peace. You talk like it's easy, she said finally. It's not, he replied. But neither is living without you. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingertips lingering just long enough for her to feel the truth behind his words. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and before she could stop herself, she leaned into him. Their foreheads touched, their breaths mingling in the quiet air. There were no more walls between them, no more defenses. Only the raw, trembling truth of two hearts that had broken each other but still somehow fit. You make it sound like we can start over, she whispered. Maybe we can't start over, he said. But maybe we can start again. The difference was subtle, but it was everything. Ilara smiled faintly, her lips barely touching his. You're a fool, she said softly. I know, he murmured. But I'm your fool. The sun was beginning to rise now, painting the world in pale gold. The night, their midnight, was fading, but the love it had rekindled didn't fade with it. It lingered in the air, in the quiet rhythm of their breaths, in the small miracle of their closeness. They stayed like that, suspended between what had been and what might be, holding on not to the past but to the possibility of tomorrow. And as the first light touched their faces, Daniel whispered the words that had been waiting in his heart all along, not as a promise, but as a prayer. No matter how many dawns come, you'll always be my midnight. The first rays of dawn kissed the world awake, but for Daniel and Ilara, time still felt suspended, caught in that sacred space between night and day, between heartbreak and healing. The golden light spilled across the lake, glimmering like melted honey, yet it couldn't outshine the softness in Ilara's eyes or the quiet strength in Daniel's gaze. They had spent so long running from their past, pretending that forgetting was easier than feeling. But now, sitting side by side as morning unfurled around them, it was clear that some loves were meant to return not because they were unfinished, but because they were eternal. Ilara exhaled softly, watching the light spread across the water. It's strange, she murmured. I used to think I'd never come back here. That if I did, it would only remind me of what I lost. Daniel's voice was tender, touched by a small smile. And now, he asked. She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no resentment in her expression, only calm acceptance. Now it reminds me of what I survived, she said. And what I still have left to feel. Her words lingered in the air like a sigh, and Daniel reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried years of longing, apology, and unspoken love. The warmth of his touch sank into her skin, spreading through her like sunlight. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she turned her palm upward, letting his hand fit into hers like it had always belonged there. You always did have cold hands, she whispered, teasing softly. Daniel chuckled under his breath. That's because you stole all the warmth, he replied. The familiar playfulness between them was fragile but real, like the first green shoot pushing through cracked earth. It wasn't about pretending the pain hadn't existed, it was about learning that love could still grow in the places it had once broken. The soft hum of morning filled the air, birds stirring in the trees, the quiet lap of water against the pier. Everything felt new, alive, reborn. Daniel turned toward her fully now, his eyes reflecting the golden shimmer of dawn. You said you can't trust me yet, he said carefully. I understand. But I want to earn it. Not by words, but by staying. Ilara studied him for a long moment, her gaze tracing the lines of his face, the faint creases near his eyes, the stubble along his jaw, the quiet determination that had always been there, even when he doubted himself. "You think staying is enough?" she asked softly. "It's a start," he replied. There was a time when Ilara would have questioned him, when fear would have built walls around her heart so high that not even love could climb them. But now, after everything, the distance, the silence, the pain, she understood something simple yet powerful. Love wasn't about never breaking. It was about coming back whole after being shattered. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need promises, Daniel. I just need presence." Her words hit him like sunlight, warm, steady, and life-giving. "Then you'll have it," he said, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "For as long as you'll let me." For a while, they said nothing more. The world didn't need their words, it already understood. The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and morning dew. The sky shifted from amber to rose, painting their faces with delicate light. Ilara's head tilted slightly toward Daniel, and before she even realized it, her body moved on instinct, the same instinct that had once drawn her to him like gravity. Their faces were close now, breaths mingling, hearts trembling in sync. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Why not?" he murmured. "Because it makes me forget why I was angry." His lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. "Then maybe that's a good thing." Her breath caught. He leaned in, slow, gentle, deliberate, and when his lips finally touched hers, the world fell away. It wasn't a kiss of urgency or desperation, it was a quiet confession, a bridge rebuilt from the pieces of everything they'd lost. The taste of him was familiar yet new, filled with promise, filled with apology, filled with love. Time melted around them, the sound of the world fading into the background until there was nothing left but the rhythm of their hearts and the warmth of their closeness. When they finally pulled apart, Ilara's forehead rested against his, her eyes closed, her voice trembling with emotion. "You still feel like home," she whispered. "That's because I never stopped being yours," he replied. The light around them grew stronger, golden and alive, wrapping their silhouettes in a soft glow. Ilara smiled through her tears, and for the first time, they weren't tears of pain, they were tears of release. "We lost so much time," she said quietly. "Then let's not waste any more," Daniel answered. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingertips grazing her cheek. "We can't rewrite the past," he continued, "but we can choose how the story goes from here." Ilara nodded slowly, her heart finally steady. "Then let's write it together," she whispered. The words were small, but they changed everything. The heaviness between them lifted, replaced by something lighter, freer. The lake shimmered, the wind softened, and the morning finally felt like a beginning instead of an ending. They stood, their hands still joined, and faced the horizon together. The sun had fully risen now, painting the world in fire and gold, the kind of light that promised new chapters, not repetitions of the old ones. Daniel turned to her one last time before they began to walk. "You know," he said softly, "I think the world ends and begins every night at midnight." Ilara smiled, her eyes glowing like the dawn. "Then maybe," she replied, "we were never ending, we were just waiting for another beginning." And with that, they walked forward, two souls no longer haunted by what was lost, but guided by what had been found again. Their midnight love talk had become their sunrise, proof that even after the darkest nights, love could still bloom with the morning.